excited today to have one of my friends joining us as the first speaker in our Achieve More community. So I'm going to let him go ahead and introduce himself and share a few wins and learns over the years that he's had. And we're so excited to have him here joining us.
Thank you. My name is Loren Norris, and I have a couple of different projects in the works, so to speak. One of those is a class I call Story Power Masterclass, and it's really about helping leaders become better communicators. But what I find in the class is not always the CEO or the business owner or the podcast host in the classroom, or even the person who says, I want to be a motivational speaker in the front of the room. What I find a lot are people who say, I know there's a story in me, I just don't know how to get it out. Or when it comes out, it sounds really, really weird. And so what I've experienced in my own wins and fails, just recently, I've been doing this Story Power Masterclass since 2012. That was the very first time I accidentally realized I hear and tell people's stories often differently than they tell them themselves. And so I did it a couple of times and people were like, wow, do that again. I'm like, I can't. And so for a long time, what would happen is I would help people with their story, but I never documented the process. And so one of the fails would be I would walk through that with one person, and then I would literally have to reinvent the wheel to do it again with somebody else. Because what I didn't do was make note of how I helped person A so that person B could learn from those same processes. Now, I don't know if you had somebody like my mother growing up. My mother was a very intelligent woman. There were a lot of recipes. I mean, a lot of recipes. We have some of those recipes in our pantry now where the cookbooks are this thick, or so it would seem, and pages hanging out in every direction. And she would walk to the pantry and open that cookbook and look at the title of a recipe, close the book, put it back on the shelf, and go make it from scratch. Really, she used the cookbook like some people use TikTok. It was just a reference point to something she wanted to do. And I found myself 4 or 5 years into this Story Power Masterclass concept doing a very similar thing. People would say, help me with my story. And we would start over from scratch. We would make it with some of the same ingredients that I'd used before, but there was no real methodology to what I was doing. And 10 years in, it was still a side hustle. 10 years in, it still didn't generate enough revenue to call it a full-time project. 10 years in, I got great results with the people who sat down with me and we worked through that whole recipe from scratch. But if I handed that recipe to somebody else, it looked like my mother's recipe book with pictures and pages hanging out the sides in every direction, and nobody could duplicate it. It wasn't completely useless, but it was really, really close. Now, obviously, if you can't duplicate it, you can't count on it from a product standpoint or a profitability standpoint. And so that was one of my biggest learning opportunities. Some might call it a fail. I would say it was a learning opportunity. Another one, though, recently came to me. I was in a conversation with somebody, and he said, do you know my friend Tom? And I said, Tom, he said, Zig Ziglar's son, Tom. And I said, actually, I do happen to know Tom personally. I speak at the morning devotional with the Ziglar Corporation at least a couple of times a year as the guest speaker. And so, yeah, I'm very familiar with Tom and the family, and I've met Zig in person a couple of times way back when. My friend Tom told me that there are a lot of people who think that Zig Ziglar changed a lot of lives by speaking. And I said, well, yeah, he probably spoke on more platforms in front of more crowds than anybody ever in history, if not really, really close to that. And he said, yeah, but when they did the survey of the effectiveness of the results of what he was doing, Tom says they pulled 100 thank you letters and testimonials and laid them all next to each other, stacked them up based on how many people said, I heard Zig speak and it changed my life, versus those who had some other reason for being appreciative of the impact. Just one of those testimonials actually said, I was impacted by Tom speaking, or excuse me, by Zig speaking. One was impacted by Zig speaking. 99 said, thank you. Your book changed my life. The course changed my life. Being engaged with your company changed my life. What does that mean? It wasn't the great speech on the platform that did it. It was the product the methodology, the system on the back end. Now, I can be honest and tell you, for probably a dozen years or more, I have pursued the keynote speech opportunity for a means of my own success. I know I've won the day. I have the big win when I get that check at the end of the day for having spoken on the stage. I guess you could say I looked for at least a dozen years as that keynote speech, that breakout session, that long conference opportunity as the end of the rainbow. It was the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And in that moment, I realized that keynote speech is really an introduction. Like Zig, fewer people have said, I heard you speak and you changed my life. You made me think. I've got a lot to process. You've given me great information, a lot of hugs and high fives and thank yous and even tear-filled eyes. And all of those are awesome. But the ones that I sat down with an hour or 2 or 6 or 90 days and step by step methodically worked through the challenges that they're having and help them readdress the stories that they tell. Maybe it's the stories they tell on the platform or on their podcast. Maybe it's the story they're telling to their teenagers. Maybe it's the story they're telling to their employees. Here's a hard one for you, though. Maybe it's the story they're telling to themselves. I recently had an opportunity to compete with Pete Vargas and Grant Cardone's The Great American Speak Off. And in the Dallas area, I competed against several thousand people. Altogether, I think there were 27,000 national contestants in that Speak Off. I made it to the final 150. I didn't make it to the final 4, but I made it to the final 150. And one of the things that dawned on me in that journey was a win that I had almost 30 years ago. And I didn't realize then, A, that it was a win, or B, that 3 decades later, that occasion is still driving what I do. I had disassociated the two stories into what I'm doing. Now, I can see along the way that story kind of popped up a couple of times, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's interesting. But it wasn't until I was working on that 2 minute, the 1 minute. It's got to be 1 minute in front of the crowd. It's got to be able to get the impression. It's got to be able to hook the audience. It's got to give an idea of why you do what you do. So I'm going to give you that 1 minute, and I'm going to explain how it's true in your life as well. I walked around the corner and I found my mom down on her knees, face buried in the urinal in the same boys' bathroom where I went to middle school. And I said, Mom, let's go to dinner. And she said, well, I got to finish this bathroom and the one on the West Wing, and then we can go. And I said, why are you doing this? She said, well, this is my job. I said, I understand that, but why is it your job? Why this? She said, well, son, you know I dropped out of high school. This is the best job I'll ever have. And I said, no, Mom, that's not true. That's a lie. That's a story. That's a narrative that you've been telling yourself for years. And the worst part is you started it and you believe it. Well, the Air Force sent me off to Honduras for the next 6 months, almost immediately after that conversation. While I'm in Honduras, I get a phone call from my aunt. Had never called me at work before that day and has never called me at work since that day. But on that day, she called and said, you know, that conversation you had with your mom, that was really hard on her. She cried for days. And I'm waiting for her to tell me, Mom has had a heart attack. Mom has had some kind of issue as a result of this conversation. And she says to me, she wouldn't take no for an answer. So she and I both decided to go back to school and get our GED. And I was like, yes. But the school wouldn't give her GED. And I was like, she said, well, actually, the school counselor who's responsible for the adult education saw your mom's test scores and said, I won't let you settle for a GED. I think you should stay and get your high school diploma. So my aunt got her GED and my mom stayed and got her high school diploma. And when she finished that, the school counselor said, I've already talked to the superintendent of schools in this school district. And if you're willing to go back to school, to go to college, we'll bridge the employment time of your janitor service toward your teacher's retirement. Mom graduated from college with a degree in education and minors in psychology and English. The same month she turned 50 years old. She also spent the next 15 years helping kids who are ready to drop out of high school and give up on their life rewrite the story of their own future. One of those girls went from a 15-year-old pregnant drug addict to the director of nursing in Georgetown. Another one was a young man who had been given up on. The school had written him off. He came back, he graduated, went on to ROTC in college. There are a lot of people who have given up already. They've unplugged, they've stepped back, they've said, I'm done. This is the best I can do. I quit where I'm at because everybody has told me I'll never do any better. Now, if you're a parent and you've ever told the story to your child about your own failures and you've stopped at the point of failure. See, I could have ended that story with, Mom said, I can't go to dinner tonight. I could have stopped with, she decided to go back and get her high school diploma. I could have stopped with, she graduated from college the same month she turned 50. I could even stop with, she helped for the next 15 years until she actually did retire. She helped these kids rewrite the story of their life. But that's not the end of the story, because now I've written 7 books. I've spoken to audiences of 14 to 40,000 people. I've traveled around the globe and done leadership training classes for the Parliament of the Congo, for seminaries in Cuba, for business leaders in Brazil, because I refuse to let that be the end of the story. And I know that story power is often about the story that we tell from the platform, tell on the podcast, tell on the ad. Sometimes the quality of the story, the delivery of the story, the ethos and the pathos and the logos, and how do we connect with the human. All of those things are important. But you know what's more important is the fact that you don't let the story end. That you keep telling the story, you keep living the story, and you keep perfecting the story, because it's not over until you've drawn your last breath. And until you've drawn your last breath, you have the right and the power to rewrite the story. And my challenge for you is exactly that. Take the time. Look at the failures. Of course, they're going to be there. We're all going to make mistakes. In the same conversation that he said, it's not the speaking from the stage, it's the products and services after. Grant Cardone asked me what I charge for coaching. And when I told him, he laughed out loud. And then he said to me, you're too old for that. You should be charging 5 times that. Now, I wasn't brave enough to go 5X or even the Grant Cardone method of 10X, but I did go 2X. That day I committed, I will go 2X. I will double my prices. And the next 3 clients that I talked to all said, that's all you charge? See, I was writing a story of my own value based on my own pocketbook. My budget determined my worth, and it wasn't true. My ability to sit down with someone with or without a recipe book and rewrite the stories that they use to change the lives of people around them in their business, in their family, in the mirror. My value doing that is so much higher than I'd ever anticipated. I can be very effective at that. And so right now, as of today, literally, I am 13, these are my tally marks, 13 videos into my new online course that will allow people to walk through the entire process. Story Power is now a product. It is a class I will teach live every month in the year of 2023. I've never done that before. This is a first. It will be an online course where you can walk through a 5 to 10 minute video, follow the homework in it, and you will be able to build exactly the same kind of stories that I've taught people to build for a dozen years. And it won't look like Mom's recipe book, all flared out in every direction with just the title at the top of the page. No, it'll be real step by step. If you do this first and you do this next, you're going to get a consistent result. That's what I'm offering this year for the first time ever, because I realize Tom was right. I often get an opportunity to stand on the stage and speak, and I walk away with high fives and hugs, and that's the end of the story. I refuse to let that be the end of the story, and my challenge for you is exactly the same. Refuse to let the story as it is now be the end of the story. Dive in deep, dive in hard, look at every single aspect of the story and ask yourself, what if that wasn't true, and how could I make it better? And don't give up on your story until you're ready to draw your last breath. And even then, pass it on. My job now is to carry on my mom's legacy, to help other people rewrite their stories and not give up on the one they're living in. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thanks so much. We greatly appreciate that. You sharing your story with us and the story that will continue to go. I think there's some pretty powerful messages in there. The biggest one really that stood out to me is just persistence, right? You had a conversation with your mother, and she was not what you said to her. That one statement that you said to her completely changed her life. And I
Yes.
think as we're looking at the people we impact, you mentioned it, whether you're at home or at work or whatever that may be, like what story are you helping people with? As leaders and managers and business owners, we impact people on a day-to-day basis, and we all have stories. We all have a story that we came from. There's things that we're doing because of something along the way that's impacted us. And I just think that message you shared today is amazing. And we greatly appreciate you being here. And thank you so much for joining us today. And what's a website link for them to be able to find out a little bit more about you?
You can go to storypowermasterclass.com.
Awesome.
Storypowermasterclass.com will give you everything you need to know about me, and you can find more from that page.
Great. So we'll definitely check that out. And then also, I think you were saying this year is going to be the first year that you're offering this. So that's going to be awesome. We look forward to hearing from you again based on the success that you're having from that. But thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to hearing from you again soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Beth.
Have a great day.
You too.